Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Believe It or Not. This is our 11th session, believe it or not. And tonight we have the privilege of learning about Sufism, which will build on our discussion last week of Islam. And for over 1,000 years, the Sufis have been creators and preservers of poetry, literature, art, dance, and knowledge. Sufis are renowned for their universal and non-judgmental approach to the search for the divine. Using story and spiritual journey of Rumi, who many of you have heard of, I'm sure, a 13th century Sufi mystic, and poet. So tonight we'll be exploring how the Sufi understanding of spirit might inform our own search for meaning and experience the Sufi method of opening to the deep love of the heart. And I know you're going to touch a bit about how Sufism fits into the larger picture of Islam as well. Pat Abdullah Aylward is a graduate of the U of M Spiritual Healing and Sufism. He's a muqaddam, a community leader in the Shadhilya Sufi tradition, and has taught Sufism and spiritual healing since 2004. He also has a broad range of knowledge in other spiritual traditions, including Christianity, Vedanta, Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and other wisdom traditions. So welcome.
Thank you.
Looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for the invitation. And I was saying to Gail in a conversation that we had that, especially in gatherings like this and classes like this, I really like to be able to open it up to conversation and to discussion. So feel free to interrupt me, ask questions at any point, at any time, because for me, that's what makes it even more fun. So I really welcome that. There are very many different types of Sufis, and so I'm going to give you a certain perspective, and that perspective is from my kind of journey and within the tradition that I'm in, and I'll talk about that as we go a little bit further into tonight. Traditionally, it's tradition in Islam that when a speaker gets up to deliver a lecture, he'll say that anything that I say that's correct is from Allah, and anything that I say that's incorrect is from me. So that's kind of a given in these forums. So when we begin, when we greet each other with the words Assalamu alaikum, which is peace be with you, like shalom, Assalamu alaikum. And when we start any gathering or any session or any teaching, we begin with a prayer. And so we're going to begin with that prayer tonight, and that prayer is called the Fatiha. The Fatiha is the first chapter in the Quran, the holy book. And the Fatiha is known as the opener. And it's the prayer that we do to begin. It's the prayer that we often do to close these sessions. And it's said that the entirety of the Quran is contained within these verses of the Fatiha. So we'll begin with that. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim. Waladallin. Amen. Alhamdulillah. There's a poem by Rumi, the 13th century Sufi mystic and poet. Rumi says, "Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, come. Ours is not a caravan of despair. It doesn't matter if you've broken your vow 1,000 times, still come, and yet again, come." So tonight, as we kind of talk about Sufism and talk about the relationship of Sufism and Islam and talk about the relationship of Sufism and some of the other traditions, especially the prophetic traditions, we're going to be interweaving poetry from Rumi and using it as kind of as a method of understanding the Sufi way of viewing the world. and the approach to the divine. And I'll be telling a little bit about this story and telling some stories about Rumi tonight. But first, what I thought I'd do is tell you guys a little bit about me and how I came to be a Sufi. I grew up as a Catholic kid. And so I was raised as a Catholic, and like many Catholic kids of my time, I did go through a period of being enamored of the church, did go through a period in which I thought that I might want to be a priest. That would have been the 5th grade. I was an altar boy, and so I always had kind of a something within me that was searching for a greater meaning. That was always present within me. As I became a teenager and got a little bit older, my draw to Catholicism started waning, and I started exploring other ways. And Rabbi Gail, in her introduction, talked a little bit about some of the paths that I've tread. So when I was 16 years old, still in high school, some friends of mine said, there's this guy that's giving these lectures on meditation or something like that. You should come in and see him. So I went with them, and his name was Dr. Ushabud Arya. And he was the founder of the Meditation Center, which is still in existence in Northeast Minneapolis. And at that time, he was a teacher, a professor at the University of Minnesota, teaching Sanskrit and Asian religion. And he would teach these classes on meditation and Vedanta in the attic of his house, where he lived. And Vedanta, if you don't know, you studied Hinduism, Vedanta is like classic yoga philosophy. It's like the pure essence of Hindu philosophy. So I went up there, and Dr. Arya was giving these talks and these lectures, and he was using a lot of Sanskrit words because the language of Vedanta is Sanskrit. And I understood maybe about this much of what he was saying. I mean, it was very scholarly, and there was a lot of Sanskrit. But what I did know was that he was a special person. He was what I would call an extraordinary man. He carried something within him. And so my friends quickly grew bored of this and left that class, but I kept going. And at the end of the summer, I got initiated into that system of yoga. I was 16 years old. My mom went with me to the initiation. When you sit with him, and he gives you your mantra, and you take the initiation, you get a spiritual name, which I did. And so I started doing that type of meditation and studied that system and started doing that. And that was kind of the beginning of my journey. When I went into college at Macalester College in St. Paul, I met another extraordinary man, a teacher by the name of David White. And I took a seminar on Gandhi my freshman year. And David was somebody who taught Asian philosophy and religion and had an unbelievable and deep understanding of it. And his personal journey, his personal story was extraordinary. And so from him, I came to get a real appreciation, a deeper appreciation of not only Hinduism, but Buddhism, Taoism, Zen, those other aspects. And I changed my major from poli-sci to philosophy. And my advisor said, well, what are you going to do with a philosophy major? Good question. So, but that's what I wanted to pursue. And so that's what I studied. And I studied all the major traditions at that time. And I kind of worked my way from Vedanta to, there's a period when I came back to Christianity, and I started doing Christian meditation. Some of you may be familiar with, there's an Eastern rite, and they use a type of practice that's called the Jesus Prayer, the Philokalia and the writings of the Eastern masters of Christianity. And so I started doing that practice, doing the Jesus Prayer and fasting and doing those various practices, of which I did for a number of years. And I continued my journey in my reading, and I was enamored of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I saw Krishnamurti. Some of you may know that name. He was somebody that was touted as the world master back in the early part of the 20th century. Extraordinary man. And so I met him, studied with him. Eventually wound my way to Buddhism and studied with some Tibetan Buddhists here because there's a significant Tibetan Buddhist community in the Twin Cities. And then eventually to Zen. So I went through most of them. Never converted to Judaism. But
It's never too late. We can talk later.
So then one day, about maybe not quite 15 years ago, this friend of mine said, there's this guy coming to Chicago, you should come and see him. His name is Dr. Ibrahim Jaffe, and he's a Sufi healer. Now, I had done many different types of meditation, so I was very familiar with the different types of wisdom traditions and their meditation systems. But healing was something that had never held any interest for me. But on the basis of her recommendation, I said, okay, I'll go. So I go to Chicago, and he's doing this weekend seminar on relationship, and I'm in there with a group of like 40 or 50 people. Now, Dr. Jaffe is an MD. He's a Sufi. He's kind of a big man. He wears the robes and the cap and, kind of an impressive presence. And he's a spiritual healer, besides being an MD. So he sees the energetic system of the body. Some of you may or may not believe in that, but, actually the Sufis believe that the human being is more than just the physical body. Most spiritual traditions agree with that. So he would have people up there, and he would do these things, not touching them, but doing these things, and it would affect, these changes to them, and they'd have these experiences and reactions. They'd laugh and they'd cry and all this sort of stuff was going on. And I just thought to myself, this is really strange. This is really weird. But there was something about him, and what moved me was he had this like aura or sense of just unconditional love and acceptance, which I found very compelling. And having immediately come out of a Zen tradition, and no digs on Zen, Zen's cool. But for me, just that presence of love was very compelling for me. And it was something that my spirit needed. And Ibrahim would talk about the love when he was teaching. Our teachings is about the love, not love, but the love. And he says, do this practice, which is the Sufi meditation, which is called remembrance, which is the recitation of the name of God, Allah, right? Allah, the one. So do the practice of remembrance, Allah, Allah, Allah. So I started doing it. I had my beads that were different than these, but I'm doing Allah, Allah, Allah for weeks and for months. And it's a mental recitation. I'm saying the name in my mind, da, 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 Allah, Allah, Allah. So one day, I'm in a hotel room in Florida doing a workshop, attending a workshop of his. I'm in my room, and I'm going, Allah, Allah, Allah. And I feel like within the center of my chest, as if something has burst open. And my experience was, if there were like a gel cap lodged within my chest that burst open, and this warm liquid started flowing throughout my chest. And I could feel it. It felt warm, it felt like glowing. And I'd never experienced anything like that before. And I wonder if that's what he's talking about. That was my first kind of experience of what Ibrahim called the love. And so I said, maybe that's it. And so I kept doing this practice. And what I found was that I had that experience, and then, it was just mental recitation, Allah, 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 Allah. But the more I did it, the more I would have experiences like that, where I felt something open within my heart. And my process was, it opened and then it would close. It opened and then it would close. But then one day it opened and it didn't quite close. And what Ibrahim taught us, and what the Sufis say, is that our means of connecting with the divine, connecting with Allah, is unique to each of us. It's like a language that we need to learn. And for me, my primary language, my primary means of connection is kinesthetic, is through feeling. And so I felt that connection to the divine, and over time, as I did the prayers and the practices and got further and further and deeper into it, that connection never closed. It never shut down. And for me, it was an extraordinary, it turned my life around. And that's why I ended up becoming a Sufi. I then studied at the Sufi University and did that course of work, and eventually started teaching. And I started teaching just to share kind of what I had learned. And that's why I'm here today, too, is just to share, what I've learned. So it's kind of a strange place to be. People ask, what is Sufism? Last week you guys studied Islam. And so when people say, what is Sufism, there's a lot of different answers to that, and you hear a lot of different things. It's very common that people say that Sufism is the mystical aspect of Islam. And there's a real sense in which that's true. But it's more than that. The word Sufi, no one is really absolutely sure where the word Sufi comes from. Some people say it comes from the word Safa, which is Arabic for purity. Other people say that it comes from the word Suf, which is Arabic for wool, because back in the day, the Sufis used to wear coarse woolen garments. Suf, wool. In fact, this is an aside. It's said that George Lucas fashioned the garments that the Jedi Knights wore after the traditional Sufi garments. So, which I thought was pretty cool. To the Sufi and to Muslims, we come into this world as the image of the divine. So the Sufis say that in the Quran it says, I, Allah, am closer to you than your jugular vein. So the Sufis say that the essence of the divine manifests itself as us, as human beings. We have our experience, and when we die, we re-enter, and it's like we re-emerge into that divine essence. Rumi has an image that he uses of the drop in the ocean. You know, the drop of water merges with the ocean and re-emerges from the ocean, but the essence of it is the same. That's the Sufis' understanding. So in this sense, the Sufis say that we come into this world with that presence of God innately part of who we are as human beings. And what happens to us, what our human experience is that from the point that we're babies and then little children, we acquire the events, the psychological and other things that happen to us within our family and within the world, and we lose sight of that divinity. The baby and the child are the image of God, but they don't have the consciousness of it. As we grow, we lose sight of that, and the Sufis use the imagery of like a veil being put over the light. And so those veils keep piling up. And the job of us as human beings is to remove the veils to see who we really are. We're not creating anything. We're not making anything that isn't already there, but we're simply revealing it to be who we actually are. Joseph Smith called that the hero's journey. And that's what it is, in my opinion. It's the hero's journey, which is to remove the things that keep us from seeing ourselves the way we really are. And for the Sufi, it's the primary means of doing this is through the heart, through enlightening the heart. There was a Sufi saint called Ibn Arabi. Some of you may have heard of him. Ibn Arabi said, God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in man. So for the Sufi, the divine is infused throughout the entirety of creation, no exception. But in the human being, it reaches its apex of consciousness. One of the sayings from the Sufi saints is that he who knows himself knows his Lord. She who knows herself knows her Lord. So, and that's the same Gnostic saying that comes through all the wisdom traditions, isn't it? So, my understanding, and this is what I teach, is that there's only one God, right? There's not a Christian God and a Jewish God and a Muslim God and the word God in and of itself can be problematic. There's this divine essence that is who we are, all of us, no exceptions, none, no exceptions. And that the wisdom traditions offer us a means of understanding ourselves through them. And people ask me, is this way better than this way, better than this way? And I'm a Sufi teacher, and I teach Sufism, which is what I do. But when people come to me, I say, whatever way you choose, find what resonates with you and go deep with that. And I use the imagery when people come to me as underneath the earth, however many feet, there are reservoirs of water, right? Large reservoirs of water. If you go over here and you dig a well and you go deep enough, you hit that reservoir. If you go over here and you dig deep enough, you'll hit that same reservoir. It doesn't make any difference where you dig as long as you go deep enough. What I did to a degree throughout the first few decades of my life is I would go this far and then I would pull up and then I'd go over here and I'd go this far and I'd pull up. Ruby calls them spiritual window shoppers. I was pretty serious about it, but there was a degree in which I was kind of a spiritual window shopper too. But what I say is that do what resonates with you and then go deep. And if you go deep, you'll hit that same reservoir. And my understanding from meeting people of all these different traditions who have done that and who are extraordinary is that the essence and the qualities that they carry is that same image of the one divine. Now, are they the same? No, because our personalities are different. But there's commonalities to anybody that goes deep within their understanding of who they really are in the context of what your wisdom tradition might be. And what are those qualities? My experience are those qualities are compassion, love, peace, reconciliation. And I see that with all the people that I've met that have gone deep within their traditions. So I say, if Sufism is what resonates with you, then do that. And if it's Judaism, or if it's Christianity, or if it's Vedanta, or whatever it is, understand it, and understand it deeply. Because Gail and I were talking about this before we began. There's differences on the outside. And during the course of this, you've studied different religions, and in the course of that, you've seen the differences. And those exterior differences cannot be reconciled. Jesus is either the Son of God or he's not the Son of God. He can't be both. To the Muslims and the Sufis, Jesus was a prophet, okay, and not the Son of God, different from any other person. That can't be reconciled. That cannot be, it's either one or the other. But when you go underneath and you go into the heart of the tradition, then you open up to the reality. And that's essentially what Sufism is within the context of Islam. It's my teacher says that Sufism is the heart of Islam. It's the essence of Islam. And he teaches that we make no separation and no difference between people on any account. And we respect and we revere all the prophets. And when we do our prayers, we specifically name the Abrahamic prophets: Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Abraham. And we say that every time that we meet, that we give respect and our blessings to those prophets. If you go deep within your tradition, whatever that tradition might be, you hit the essence, the core of who you are as a human being, and you open your being to that aspect of yourself, and you come to know yourself as the mirror of the divine. Now, the Sufis throughout history within the Islamic tradition have been one of the primary carriers and creators of literature, of music, of dance, the creative arts, of scholarship. And if you look at the lives of the Sufi scholars, and especially the Sufi saints, they talk about the identity of the human being in its divine essence. And there have been times in which their speaking about that has gotten them into trouble within society. And there have been times when their talking about that has gotten them killed within society. But that's the essence of the Sufi teaching. Sufism for hundreds and hundreds of years was, in a sense, kind of not underground, but very kind of confined. And if you wanted to study in the Sufi way, you would find a teacher who carried that gnosis, who carried that understanding. And it's the same way it is today. In our tradition, this is the teacher who's who's alive today. His name is Sidi Muhammad al-Jamal of Jerusalem. And so if you wanted to study Sufism, and if you wanted, you would find somebody that carries that understanding. Because to understand this way, it's a way of opening the heart. And you probably talked about the Quran being the holy book of Islam last week. So it's said, you know the story of the Prophet Muhammad, and he would go up to the cave to meditate, right? And so he's meditating in the cave, and one day the prophet, the angel Jibril, comes to him. And this is the beginning of the Quranic revelations. But the story goes like this. I don't know if you told it last week. So Muhammad is there in the cave meditating, and the angel approaches him. And the angel embraces Muhammad, and he pulls him close, and he says, "Iqra," meaning read or recite. Now, you may have read or known that Muhammad was illiterate. He couldn't read. And so the angel says, "Read, recite." And Muhammad says to the angel, "I can't read." So the angel pulls the prophet closer to him and says, "Iqra," read. And the prophet again says, I can't read. And then the third time, the angel pulls him to his chest and says, "Iqra," read. And the revelation starts coming out of the prophet. And the angel says to Muhammad, "From my lips to your ears to your heart." And that's the transmission. And you could see the imagery of the prophet and the angel embraced like that, with the angel reciting the revelation of the Quran, the prophet hearing it, and it being written almost in his heart. But it's like, and he then recites it back to the angel, and so it's like this circuit, this chain. That's how Sufi teaching is to this day. In order to understand this and to get it, you study with somebody who carries it. And in the old days, you would go to, his or her village, and you would live in their house, or you would live next to them, and you would see them every single day. And you would read the books, and you would pray with them, and you would see how they lived their life. And the transmission was scholarly. It was, understand these books and do these things, but it was much more than that. It was a transmission about this is the heart, this is how we open the heart, and it was done in the context of living. And it's the same way today. And Sufis learn from living human beings. There's a chain of transmission, and you'll see it in every Sufi lineage, every single one, without exception. And they'll all go back to the Prophet Muhammad. So they start with the Prophet, and let's say, we'll take my teacher. His name is Sidi Muhammad. So today. So his teacher, his teacher, his teacher, his teacher, his teacher, and there's like, probably 60 or 70 links back to the Prophet. And this lineage is called a silsila. And one of the means that teachers demonstrate their ability to teach is by showing you what that is. Now, these connections are not bloodline. These aren't familial connections. They're spiritual connections. So at some point in the past, there was an extraordinary person that gave their name to the Sufi order. My Sufi order is called Shaduliya. And it comes from a man named Abu Hassan ash-Shaduli, who lived in Morocco in the 9th century. So he appeared in this lineage, and there were masters that were a direct link before him, and then after him up to today. So Sufis study with living human beings that carry this understanding, carry this consciousness, carry this gnosis. It's not just about reading books. It's not just about scholarship. It's about really living and opening the heart. And that's one of the beauties of the Sufi way. Okay. I want to talk about another aspect of Sufi teaching. we talked about, in any wisdom tradition, there's an exterior and an interior. Before I go into that, are there any questions you guys have? Anything you want to ask, anything that's on?
Do people just remember who was all the way up their line, or always, you talk about the teachers?
Right, so the question is, do people remember the aspect of lineage? Some do. Like, if I went to Sidi and asked him to recite that lineage, he could recite it. I can't. I need to take a look at it, but yeah.
But it is recorded someplace?
Oh, it's absolutely recorded. Yeah, it's absolutely recorded.
And so he's in Jerusalem, so there's a Sufi presence in Jerusalem.
He lives in Jerusalem. He's one of the imams at the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Oh, okay.
And so you guys studied this last week. There's like, 3 holy places. There's Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, right? And so the Al-Aqsa Mosque is one of the 3 holy places of Islam. And so he is one of the imams. This is a big mosque, and so an imam is a spiritual leader. And so if you were to go to a mosque here in the Twin Cities, typically they would have 1, sometimes 2 imams, but the Al-Aqsa Mosque probably has dozens of imams because of its size. He is one of them. So he's lived in Jerusalem, he's lived in Palestine all his life. I'll tell you a little story. I'm getting a little bit off track here, but so he has met with the leaders of the Jewish community, the Christian community, and he works within Jerusalem to foster peace. He has a kindergarten that he started in Jerusalem about 5 years ago, where Christian kids and Jewish kids and Muslim kids can come to study, to learn, and to get fed. And that's what he does. People line up at his door to get clothing and to receive whatever they need, and he just gives to the people. Makes no distinction between who they are or where they come from. And that's his teaching. In our way, in the Shadliya way, as taught by Sidi, people come to us for the Sufi teachings, and this is a distinction from some other Sufi orders. There are Sufi orders, in fact quite a few within the world, where if you're a part of that order, you're a Muslim, and it's just a given. That's not true of this order. Our teachings are the teachings of the Sufis. And so our prayers are done in Arabic. We take the gleanings from the holy book of the Quran. But people come to us and they're Christians and they're Jews, or they identify with no wisdom tradition. And they say, can I be a Sufi? And Sidi says yes. And he'll always say, you do not need to change your religion. When I was going to the university, there was a woman in my class who was a Christian minister in Chicago, Presbyterian, I think. And so she took the Sufi promise, which is kind of the initiation in our way. So she takes the Sufi promise from Sidi, and she goes to him and she says, I'm a Christian minister, and this is what I do, this is my life. Do I now, having taken the Sufi promise, do I need to change? Do I need to become Muslim? He goes, no, my dear, no. You be a better Christian. You learn the Sufi way, and you be a better Christian. And that's the Sufi way as taught by Sidi. So that there's no need to change the religion that you are. And you come and you take whatever it is that you can gain. Because Sufism has a wonderful and a beautiful technology for opening the heart, and to really understanding ourselves as divine beings and opening to the love that's within us. And the more that we come to know ourselves, we talked about that journey, right, and removing the veils. The clearer we come to know ourselves, the clearer we come to see the people around us. Healing starts with us. I started this by telling my story and that I didn't have any interest in healing. I ended up going to a healing school. But the healing, the Sufis call it the polishing of the heart. The healing is to coming to understand ourselves in the deepest and the clearest way, and to knowing ourselves and loving ourselves. Before I became a Sufi, I was going through all those things, all those journeys, studying with all those people. And before I met Sidi and my other teachers, I had this level of anxiety that was present within my life. It was like an existential anxiety. And if you listen to my interior dialogue would sound like something like, I'm not quite good enough, my life will be okay if I'm together with this person, or when my circumstances are like this, And there was always a sense of unease in my life in every social situation I was in. Didn't make any difference if it was my family or my friends or strangers. Didn't make any difference. I always felt like I wasn't quite good enough. I didn't felt it, I wasn't quite enough, whatever that was. And this way of opening helped me to understand who I am and to love myself so that I don't have that. It almost doesn't exist within me anymore. Now, is my life all, roses? Not by any means. I'm still plenty screwed up. I make plenty of mistakes, But I know deep within the core of my being that who I am is not about what I do. It's not about the mistakes that I make, nor the accomplishments that I achieve. That in my essence, I have that connection to the divine, which is there and which is my connection to love no matter what. No matter what. It doesn't make any difference at all. And that is huge. I mean, it's huge. It's a tremendous thing. And the more that I understand that within myself, the easier it is for me to see that in everybody else around me and to appreciate them and their unique aspect of the divine within them. And it's changed the whole tenor and the whole color of my life. Now, that's something worth doing. So, what I wanted to say, I wanted to pick up on something that I think you guys probably talked about last week. I said a few minutes ago that there's an exterior and an interior to every tradition. There's an exterior aspect and an interior aspect. And it's not that the exterior is wrong and that the interior is better. Not at all. But we need to understand that there is an exterior and that there is an interior. Sufis actually break it down a little bit more. And what they say are there's three aspects to the Sufi teaching. One is called tariqa. One is called sharia. And one is called hakika. Tariqa is the community. Almost every tradition exists within a community, some more so than others. Judaism very strong on community. Christianity is, Islam is. So we do our what we call walking. We take our journey within the context of a community. And the community is there as our brothers and sisters to help us, to support us. We support each other. And so we're working within this framework of being supported and walking with our family, our brothers and sisters. That's very important. Sharia is the exterior aspect. Sharia is the law. Sharia is do not steal, do not kill. It's the moral component primarily. So you've heard the word Sharia, right? Mm-hmm. Y'all know that word. It's in the news a lot, right? Yeah. So I'm going to read a little bit from a favorite scholar of mine in a few minutes about Sharia because if I can give us a different understanding of that word tonight, I think that would be a really cool thing. Sharia is the moral component, and it's necessary to every spiritual journey. Now, when I went to catechism when I was a kid growing up on Saturday mornings, what I got there was mostly Sharia within the context of tariqa. They told me, do this, do this, do this, and I had to memorize these things. Y'all probably have been through that, right? Most religious training is here. Most of it. Not all, but most. And that's primarily focused on the exterior. The third component is the hakika, and the word hak means truth. And so the hakika is what I've been speaking about in these past few minutes. It's about this understanding, this gnosis of the heart, and this is not an intellectual understanding. It's a really getting a deeply intuitive understanding of how it all kind of melds and fits in. And what Sidi teaches, and this is classic Sufi teaching, is that Sharia without Hakika is cruel. If you have the Sharia, but you do not have the Hakika, it's cruel. And the fact of the matter is, in Islam today, most of the teaching, much of the teaching, is Sharia with very little, if any, Hakika, and it's cruel. Most of it is, a lot of it is, very much of it is. Without the Hakika, the Sharia can be used to do really bad things to ourselves and other people. You have to have this. It's absolutely essential. This is the interior component, the way of the heart. You have to have it. Now, Sharia in and of itself is not wrong and not bad. In a lot of the stuff that you read in the media and the things that are bandied about today, it's like we're against Sharia law, right? But the word Sharia simply means the way, the moral code. I want to read a little bit about this for you guys. This is from a book called The Search for Beauty in Islam by Khaled Abul Fadl. And he is one of the most brilliant Islamic scholars alive in the world today. And in fact, I don't know how much you got into the history of Islam last week, but if you have any interest in wanting to understand why Islam is the way it is today, the best book on that is called The Great Theft by this man, The Great Theft. It's an excellent book.
So what is his perspective? What's the great theft refer to? I mean, we did discuss the history, but just curious.
So I'll kind of Reader's Digest condensed version of it. So Islam grew rapidly after the prophet, the prophetic period of Prophet Muhammad. And it grew to encompass a major part of the world at that point. And Islamic scholarship and such probably reached its zenith in the 12th to the 14th century. Okay. After that, it started waning because the Christian territories began to retake Spain and some of the other areas. And so the civilization started collapsing. Whenever you have a civilization that's contracting rather than expanding, it can't be as magnanimous and generous, or at least historically they aren't. At the height of Islamic civilization, you had great centers of learning, Baghdad, Cordoba, Alexandria. And they would invite not just as Muslim scholars, but they would invite Jewish scholars and Christian scholars, and they were great centers of world learning, not just Muslim learning, but world learning. As you had the Mongols from the east and the Christian empires starting retaking those aspects, the empire started contracting. And whenever that happens within a civilization, it happens not just on the geopolitical scale, but it also happens within the context of thinking and scholarship and identity. And the identity of Muslims starts to become a little bit more defensive during that, as that's occurring, which did happen in those centuries, 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. And you see the rise of colonialism of British and French and other colonies, and they start, taking some of the areas that were part of the Muslim empire. And so that retrenchment continues. And then what happened within Saudi Arabia is that there was a battle for control of the Saudi peninsula. And there was a jurist who was of no repute at all, by the name of Ibn al-Wahhab, who lived in Saudi Arabia at that time, and who had a very, very puritanical interpretation of Islam. And King Fahd hooked up with him to get religious not approval, but like the religious veneer for what his political ambitions were. And so they formed an alliance. And Wahhab gave him the religious cover while he went and retook from the various tribal regions of Saudi Arabia, which he eventually succeeded in taking the entirety of the peninsula and eventually became the king of Saudi Arabia. And now Wahhab, going from a cleric of like no consideration at all, and in fact laughed at in the Muslim world, now had the ear of the king of Saudi Arabia. That in itself might not have been a big deal, except they found oil, right? That changed everything. And so with oil came money, with money came power. And so now Wahhab and his descendants, who continued in that very puritanical line of thinking, and who were their primary opponents? They weren't Christians and they weren't Jews, although they were Christians and Jews. But their primary opponents were Muslims that didn't believe the way that they believed. And many of those were Sufis. The Sufis in Saudi Arabia, most of them were killed at that time. So even to this day, if I were to go to Saudi Arabia, I would not say I'm a Sufi, because it would be a dangerous thing to do. So with the rise of oil and with the rise of money and with the rise of power, Wahhabism and that philosophy now found itself having a sponsor, and a powerful sponsor. And so even then, there was a significant component within the Islamic world that still was a counterbalance to that through the 20th century, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. But as the Saudi power got even greater and they started becoming more sophisticated in their use of it in this political religious sense, what happened was that Saudi Arabia started sponsoring universities. They started paying for mosques to be built throughout the world, countries throughout the world. They started educating imams within Saudi Arabia, all within this very puritanical strain of Islam. And so their influence from a religious standpoint kept growing and growing and growing because they were funding the communities throughout the entire world. And that's when it became on the ascent. That's why he calls it the great theft. They stole the religion from the way it had been. Yeah.
Question. Okay, way back, you've got the Sunni and Shia schism, as it were. Where does Wahhabi come with vis-a-vis that? Is that
the
a
Wahhabis-
third, or is it part of one of them?
The Wahhabis are Sunni.
Okay,
And so to the Wahhabis, the Shia are apostates.
just like the Sufis.
Yes,
Okay,
yes. Yeah, the Wahhabis are Sunni.
okay.
And so the Wahhabi brand of Islam is a perversion. There's nothing, I mean, that's exactly what it is. Now, I mean, and it's been extremely powerful and extremely influential throughout the world. So the places where Muslims, scholars and otherwise, can speak most freely these days are the United States primarily, and Europe to a secondary degree. But within the traditional Islamic regions, it's almost impossible for a scholar to speak openly. This man grew up in Egypt, and he studied in Al-Azhar, which is one of the, it is the most ancient university in the world. And he was tortured by the government in Egypt for his views. And his views are not radical, they're traditional. And so he had to come to the United States, and he is a professor of jurisprudence at UCLA, of both Islamic and American jurisprudence. And he's an extraordinary man. Let me read a little bit about what he says. Now, Fadl is talking about Sharia, okay, and this is a word that we hear in the news in all sorts of different ways today. So I want you to hear what Sharia really is. He says, God's law, Sharia, is about a process, methodology, and morality. At the core of this morality is the value of beauty. Human understanding of the law engages the process and searches the various normative values of Sharia. But human understanding can never be the embodiment of God's beauty. Furthermore, the rules are the product of the human attempt at understanding, but they do not represent God's beauty. As I argue in this book, the positive commandments or rules delineate the outer boundaries of proper behavior, but they do not articulate the substance and soul of Islamic morality. The rules are at the fringe of Islamic morality. They are the external shell that do not express or create substance. The rules are about boundaries. The boundaries could be the product of an attempt to give effect to a certain morality, or they could be the product of circumstance or convenience, Although the rules may have been inspired by a moral vision or normative ideas, they do not express a moral vision or ethos. Put differently, piety creates and pursues the rules, but the rules do not create piety. However, the rules may promote piety if they are carried out with the appropriate intent and moral vision. If the intent and moral vision do not exist, then the rules become meaningless pedantry. I try to promote a cultural ethos of beauty in contemporary Islam. I believe that the core and kernel of Islam is the search for beauty. The search for God's inexhaustible beauty in the beauty of God's creation. The search for God's law must attempt to pursue, express, promote, and recreate God's beauty. The search for beauty will necessarily mean transcending rule-making to the discovery of normative values. The normative values should inspire and direct the process of rule-making, but the rules themselves cannot be equated with morality or the core value of beauty. Now, is that very different from what you've ever understood Sharia to be? That is what Sharia is. And what's the essence of Sharia? He's very clear in saying the essence of Sharia is beauty. And what's beauty? Beauty is the haqiqah. If you don't have the heart, then the external rules become dry. And they can be used cruelly and with bad intent. So to the Sufi, our means of walking includes a balance of all these three. We read the books and we study the books and we study the moral codes. But we do so within the framework of opening the heart so that we understand, as Abu al-Fadl says, if we don't carry that core value of beauty within us, then we can go off here. And we do it all within the context of a community that supports us and is there to say, okay, maybe you need to do a little course correction here. And lets us know, when, we need support, when we're doing well, and when maybe need to be moving in a different direction. Rumi is a prime example of this. So Rumi is a poet. You all are familiar with the poetry of Rumi. You probably have read Rumi. Rumi was a Muslim scholar of the 13th century. Rumi's dad was a renowned scholar in the Persian Empire, which was much beyond what Iran is today at that time, 13th century. And so they lived in Afghanistan. Rumi was born in Balkh, in current-day Afghanistan. And so his dad taught there, and the Mongols were starting to impinge on the Islamic Empire, like I talked about before. And so they started moving into the interior of the empire to escape the wars that were happening at that time. And they ended up in a town called Konya, which is in present-day Turkey, that day Persia. And his dad took a position at the university when they ended up there. Rumi would have been in like his mid-20s at that point. His dad died 2 years after they arrived in Konya, and Rumi assumed his dad's position at the university. So Rumi had a pretty traditional Muslim education at that point, but a good education. I mean, he was a scholar, a teacher, a professor at the university in Konya. His dad was a Sufi, so he had exposure to Sufi teachings. Okay? And so Rumi, for that world, in that time, had it made. I mean, he had a good professorial position, he made good money, he had a nice house, wife, kids, had the whole thing going on. Okay? So the story goes that one day Rumi is sitting out by the square of the town in Konya, and he's sitting on this small ledge, and it's a reflecting pool. He's got his students in front of him, and he's lecturing to his students. And on the ledge are a couple of books, and among the books are the only book that his father had written. His father only wrote one book in his life. Not only was this the only book that his dad had written, it was the only copy of the only book that his dad had written, sitting on the ledge beside him. So Rumi's, discoursing to the students in front of him, and into town walks this dervish. You may have heard the word dervish. Dervish is kind of a Sufi wanderer. Comes in off the road, in his Jedi Knight, garb, dirty, kind of, looks like he's somebody of not very good repute. And so he walks straight through the crowd, he parts the students, goes over, stands in front of Rumi, takes his hand, swipes the books off the ledge right into the pool, and they go into the drink. Rumi says, "Who are you and what are you doing? How dare you do this?" And the man looks at him and says, looks straight at Rumi and says, "You must live now what you've been reading." And Rumi is just kind of like shocked. And the man turns to him and says, "We can retrieve these books. They will be just as dry as they ever were." And he reaches down into the reflecting pool, pulls the books up, hands them to Rumi, and they're completely dry.
Whoa.
And he says to Rumi, "You see, dry." And at that point, Rumi knew that this was no ordinary man. And the name of this man was Shams. The word Shams in Arabic means sun. So Rumi knew enough to know that this was an extraordinary man. Remember when I said that when I was 16 years old, I met this guy, this teacher, and I didn't know what he was saying. He was using all these words, but I knew he was somebody that I wanted to study with. And that's I've kind of gone from one person to another. And so Rumi knew that Shams was an extraordinary person, that Shams carried something within him. And so from that point, Rumi and Shams became inseparable. And they began a process of conversation. The word for it is sohbet. It's like a spiritual conversation. And they became the fastest of friends. And what Shams was doing for Rumi was the same thing of the imagery of the angel Gabriel clutching the prophet to his chest. In a different way, that's what Shams was doing. Shams carried the complete and full consciousness of God within him. He was a saint. He was a self-realized being. And what Shams was looking for was somebody that had the spiritual capability of igniting and carrying that transition, of blooming and blossoming into that same consciousness. And so Shams's prayer during his life was, "Oh Allah, show me that person." Who is that? And what he heard was, "Go to Konya. The one you seek is Jalaluddin." And so that's what he did. Rumi, on the other hand, knew that Shams was somebody that could give him the heart of the Quran. Not just the words, but the essence. And so from that became their friendship. And Shams transmitted that essence to Rumi. So Shams and Rumi spent the next couple of years together, and Rumi's students were actually kind of jealous about it because they spent all this time together. And so they were together for a couple of years, and they were always together, and then one day, the story goes, Shams walks out the back door and he's gone. Boom, just like that, gone. And Rumi is beside himself. I mean, just beside himself, that this friend that has given him so much, that has really taught him what life is all about, is now gone. And he doesn't know what to do. And the story is that in the room that they used to gather in, maybe not unlike this, there were poles that upheld the ceiling. And Rumi would hold on to the pole, and he would like circumambulate the pole, and he'd just go around and around, and while he was doing that, this poetry would flow from him, just spontaneously. And one of his students, who was his scribe, would write it down. That's how the poetry began, that comes down to us to this day. And that movement of Rumi around the column in the room became the whirling of the dervish that you see today. You've all seen pictures of it, right? You've seen the dervishes come out, and they're wearing black cloaks. I don't know if you've probably seen pictures of them, right? They come out, they're wearing the tall conical hats and the black cloaks. They come out like this, and then they unleash the black cloak, and everything is white. And they start turning around and around. And it's the remembrance, remember I said remembrance, of that movement of Rumi, who is the father of their lineage, and that turning is a form of prayer. And if you look at the dervish, their right hand is extended upwards towards the heaven, and their left hand is extended downwards towards the earth. And it's, in a way, it's symbolic of the Sufi walking, because Sufism is firmly rooted in the ground. Sufism starts with, who are we, and what is my place in this moment, at this time, right now. We don't deny anything. We don't turn away from who we are. We don't turn away from our feelings of whatever we may be feeling at this point. We recognize this is where I'm at. And at the same time, I'm open to the light of the divine. I'm open to the essence of God. And so again, we have the circuit, right? Creating that circuit of rootedness to the ground and connection with the divine. And that's the essence of what we call the whirling dervish. That turning is a recreation of that moment in time when, in Rumi's grief for the loss of his friend, this poetry started pouring out of him, which comes down to us today, such that Rumi is the best-selling poet in the world today, which he is. Another Rumi poem. He says, one night a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with the praising, until a cynic said, so I've heard you calling out, but have you ever gotten any response? The man had no answer to that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamed he saw Kidder, the guide of souls, in a thick green foliage. Why did you stop praising? Because I've never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them. From the grief of the loss of his friend came this poetry, the beginning of the poetry, and the expression of where is the connection with the divine, and the realization that yearning is the connection. And as time went on, with Shams still not coming back, one day, the story goes, Rumi was walking through the streets of Konya, and it's like, it came to him. Remember we said that the word Shams means sun. That's what the word means in Arabic. At that moment, Rumi understood that Shams, sun, was here. That he didn't need the physical presence of the man called Shams to have Shams with him always. And so in that moment, Rumi understood that Shams could never leave, because he and Shams were one. Shams had done what he had come to do, which was to pass on that transmission of the connection of the essence of the divine within the heart to Rumi, so that he understood that it was who he is, can never be separated from, regardless of the people that are there or not there. And so from there, the poetry just flowed and flowed and flowed and flowed and flowed. And you find the expression, the highest expression of what Sufism is. Rumi says, now remember, this was a Muslim in the 13th century, okay? Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I'm not from the east or the west, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist, am not an entity in this world or the next, did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know. First, last, outer, inner, only that breath breathing, human being. That's Sufism. That's what it is.
I'm gonna cut off